Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 7 of lifestyle and career development. We're going to go ahead and hop on into this review. I'm just going to go over a few chapters, chapters 16 and 17. We're going to do a really quick gloss over, and then we're going to focus in on 17 and 18 from there. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So for today, we're going to talk about really exploring the career services in college settings, which is going to take us back to what we went over last week, but we're only going to do that for a couple minutes. Then we'll talk about more in depth understanding adult transitions and specific populations, as well as learning how to chart our own career paths. So I did put some quotes in here this week. I just thought they might be a little bit helpful for us to kind of get an idea of what we're diving into. The self is not a static entity, but a developing one. Career development is essentially developing and implementing a self concept. So we're going to talk a lot about that, especially once we get into chapter 19. So for this week, we are talking about reviewing last week's materials as well as moving forward with this week's material. So exploring the role of career services in higher education settings, understanding the emotional and systemic impacts of adult career transitions, as well as examining the challenges and counseling strategies for working with specific populations. We also want to learn a structured approach to career self-development and planning. And last but not least, we want to make sure that we're approaching these things from an ethical, culturally sensitive, as well as advocacy-based approach when it comes to career counseling. So part 1, we are going to dive into that review. So chapter 16, we focused in on the role of the college career centers, and we looked at what services they provided. So for example, they provide resume reviews, mock interviews, career fairs. They also help out when it comes to really figuring out what majors align with what the person is seeking to do for themselves for their career. And again, it's really connecting academics to career goals. So making sure that things align so that they are putting themselves in the best path for reaching their goals. Chapter 17, we looked at job loss and job search process. So really looking at the emotional and practical impacts of job loss, and then looking at the cycle that job search goes through. Planning, branding ourselves, as well as outreach and really tapping into like the hidden job market and networking strategies. And then we talked about what are the interventions and resources that we can use. So during last week's discussion, we really did see some people really diving into like the ATS, how the hybrid work environment has changed things. All of those things that are new to the current economic experiences of this workforce. So we are going to go ahead and go into chapter 18, which is adult career transitions in working with specific populations. The quote that I have here is, "It's not the transition itself, but how one copes with it that determines its impact." So there are several different types of career transitions, and we can put them in 2 different buckets: voluntary as well as involuntary. So voluntary is you make the decision to transition, right? So career change, getting a promotion, going back to school, pursuing something that you're interested in, going into your own business, right? Involuntary is when basically someone's telling you that you have to make this transition. Getting laid off from work, getting terminated, health issues and concerns that might pop up, the business that you work for closes, family obligations, things like that will be the involuntary career transition. And we have to look at its impact on us, right? It's an impact on our identity, as well as our well-being, financial status, and the overall structure of the things that we do on a regular. So when we work with specific populations, we have to consider their specific needs. So when we look at clients that have disabilities, we have to make sure that we understand that, when they're seeking employment, there are some challenges that they face. Also, what are the unemployment rates when it comes to someone who has a disability? And what are some possible influences that we can really have a huge impact on, right? Of making sure that our clients are able to get the accommodations that they need, making sure that we are working towards reduction of stigma and advocating on their behalf as well too. So when we look at veterans are another population that experience, some challenges as they are navigating into a new space and transitioning into employment outside of the military, so going into civilian workforce. So when we think about veterans, they usually have a lower rate of unemployment than civilians. And also, if we look specifically at the populations within them, we notice that the younger veterans are usually going to have the harder time finding employment, so that age between 18 to 24. Why is this the case? We might be able to see it within the resources that they have. So they have pre-separation counseling, they have VA benefits, they also have job readiness training and things like that. So these things can definitely help them when it comes to finding their next career. So We also want to look at other populations as well too. So the chapter says ex-offenders. I like to use the term justice involved. So we have to think about what are some of the challenges that a person who's justice involved will encounter. So they're likely to earn less, right? They are likely to experience mental health challenges. Also, functional illiteracy, right? So being able to adapt to these different jobs, especially when literacy is important within that role. And then, there are some supports out there, so we have to make ourselves aware of these supports because we want to make our clients aware of them as well. So, federal bonding, vocational specialists. Also, another population that experiences challenges when it comes to employment are caregivers, right? So, if we look at caregivers, we have to look at those that are, stay at home parents. Also, we have to look at people that are caregivers to, someone who has a disability or elderly parent. So, we have to think about the fact that there will be gaps in their employment, possibly gaps in their skill sets because they have not been in a traditional working setting. And then there might be experiences of isolation, right? Because they're spending a lot of time taking care of those in their lives. Also, they have to have that identity shift from being, a stay-at-home parent or a caregiver to being an employee in a certain role. So definitely want to be able to provide that support and help as they transition back into the workforce or initiate it sometimes. So chapter 3, part 3, we look at chapter 19. So as we think about charting our own career paths, we'll make sure that we know that this is an ongoing process and it's ever evolving. And we want to highlight that when we go about this, we want to think about building our resume for the next 10 years. Right. So we look 10 years back, but we also look 10 years ahead, right? So that we can start to put in place long-term goals. Also, those short-term goals will start to develop themselves as we create those long-term goals. So we want to make sure that we do the first step, which is prepare, identify what the things are out there, doing some research, finding things, looking at opportunities that are out there. We also want to adjust, right? Because things might not always look the way we wanted it to once we actually dive into it and learn more about it. And then planning. Planning is always going to be helpful because then we start to put this plan in place that we can actually follow. So action steps are very important at this point, right? So we want to compare our current employment as well as our future employment. We want to compare our current skills versus the skills that we're going to need. We're going to want to look at our credentials and see what credentials we are needing. And so we want to identify action steps that align with the education that we're going to need, the experience that we're looking for, as well as networking. And there are a lot of tools out there, right? We can do My Next Move, which can help you to kind of figure out what do I have an interest in and how much training am I willing to do for this thing. Also, Career One Stop, right? So we can spend some time really assessing and seeing what are the things that are required for the specific role. So we want to do all of these things to help us develop both short-term and long-term goals. Sorry, I went ahead. I'm going to go back a little bit. All right, so ethical considerations are also important during this time. So keep in mind, as we're working with ourselves, also our clients, we want to make sure that we know that career development is very much justice, social justice involved, right? Because we can see the systemic inequalities that are present when working with certain populations. So we want to make sure that we are taking those steps in order to eliminate those barriers as we can do so. We want to do advocacy. We want to do assessments. We want to make sure that we are considering it from a cultural lens and just doing everything in a very ethical way. So what is next? So far, we have a few things on the docket for this week. If you have not done so, please go ahead and make sure that you do the Quizlet that I have the link for, and that will help you with the NCE and also studying for that final exam this week. This week it opens up. Also, there is some discussion that's going to happen as well too. So the career transition and work-life balance discussion is there. So make sure that you get your initial post turned in on the 19th, which is on Wednesday, and then also turn in your response to someone else by the 22nd. And final exam will be due by the 25th, which is next Wednesday. So grades should be posted. So you should have your grades for all the way up until the week of the 6th. If not, it might have been because something got turned a little bit later, and I'm trying to make sure I get all those things done for you guys. But overall, thank you so much, and I'll be checking back in one last time. So hope you enjoyed the semester. If you need anything, please feel free to reach out.